It was a busy afternoon in the city. The sun shone through the glass windows of the high-end electronics store, reflecting off the shiny displays of gadgets and luxury items. The store, known for its top-tier products, was filled with customers, some casually browsing and others looking for something specific. In the midst of all this, a well-dressed black man walked in. His posture was confident, his steps measured, and his eyes focused as he took in the rows of gadgets. The salesman, a young man in his late 20s, was standing behind the counter, checking his phone. His name was Jason, and he had been working at the store for nearly a year. He looked up as the black man entered, and immediately, an unpleasant thought crossed his mind. Probably just another person looking to window shop, Jason thought, scanning the man's clothes. He didn't wear anything too fancy, but the way he carried himself told Jason that he wasn't like most customers who came in to buy things they couldn't afford. Jason had dealt with a lot of people who looked out of place in the store, and he had learned to treat them with a bit of coldness. Jason stood up and approached the man with a forced smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" he said in a tone that sounded almost too polite. The black man looked up, meeting Jason's gaze. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness in his eyes. "I'm looking for a new phone," he said, scanning the shelves in front of him. Jason, still carrying that subtle judgment, led the man to the phone section. He quickly began showing the black man the most expensive models, assuming that someone like him wouldn't be interested in the cheaper ones. As he spoke, he made sure to emphasize the high price tags, believing that this would impress the man into buying. "Here we have the latest model," Jason said, pointing to a sleek, expensive phone. "It's top of the line, with the best features money can buy." The black man nodded, but his expression remained neutral. "I see," he said, not giving much of a reaction. Jason, still trying to sell, pressed on. "I'm sure you'll want something that lasts," Jason continued, "something that'll show your status. Right?" His words had a slight edge to them now, as if he was trying to confirm his assumption that the man was just another person looking to show off. The black man raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. Instead, he quietly picked up the phone and examined it. His silence made Jason feel a little uncomfortable, but he pushed the feeling aside. He was used to people like this, always pretending to be interested in things they could never afford. "I'm afraid I don't need something that flashy," the black man finally said. "What else do you have?" Jason, still caught up in his assumptions, tried to hide his surprise. "Well," he said with a dismissive glance, "we do have some simpler models, but they're not really worth the investment. I would recommend you take a look at this one instead." The black man sighed, feeling the weight of Jason's judgment, but he said nothing, deciding it was better to let the moment pass. However, as he turned to leave, Jason's attitude would soon go from rude to far worse. And this would mark the beginning of a much bigger story, one that neither of them could have imagined. The store buzzed with the sounds of ringing phones and chattering customers, but the atmosphere between Jason and the black man was tense. Jason, still convinced that the man wasn't serious about buying anything, couldn't shake the feeling that this customer was a little too calm for his liking. He had to admit, the man didn't seem to be reacting the way he expected. He was too composed, too quiet. Jason decided it was time to push harder. He moved closer to the man, who was still quietly inspecting another phone model, and forced a smile. "Are you sure you don't want something a little more high-end?" Jason asked, his tone almost too sweet, as though he was trying to sell more than just a phone. "It's really the best on the market right now. You won't find anything like it." The black man glanced up from the phone, and for a moment, Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something about the way the man looked at him, calm, almost like he saw right through him. But the man didn't say anything. Instead, he put the phone back on the shelf, nodding politely. "I'm not interested in something flashy," the black man replied, his voice still calm. "I prefer something more practical." Jason tried not to show his frustration. This wasn't going the way he expected. People who came into the store didn't leave without buying something expensive. But this man, despite everything Jason tried, wasn't giving him what he wanted. It irritated him. The black man turned to leave, but before he could make it to the door, Jason spoke up again. "Are you sure you want to leave? We've got plenty of great models here. Or is it just the price you're worried about? Because I'm sure I could make a deal for someone like you." Jason's words were laced with that same subtle condescension that had been there from the beginning. The black man paused in his tracks. He didn't turn around immediately, and Jason thought for a brief moment that the man might be about to buy something after all. But when the man finally faced him, there was no trace of the anger Jason expected to see. Instead, there was just that calm, steady gaze. "You're really not listening, are you?" the black man said, his tone still even but firm. Jason felt his face flush. He wasn't used to people challenging him, especially not in his own store. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, trying to hold on to his professionalism. "It means," the black man said, taking a step forward, "that you've made assumptions about me based on the way I look. And now you're insulting me with your offers." Jason's smile faltered. He wasn't expecting this. He had thought the man would just walk out. But now things were becoming uncomfortable. "You're way out of line," the black man continued, "but I'm not here to cause trouble." He turned again to leave the store, but as he did, something unexpected happened. Jason, with his patience running thin, lashed out. Before he could stop himself, Jason slapped the man across the face, thinking it would scare him off. He was wrong. The store went quiet. Jason's heart raced. He immediately realized the mistake he'd just made. The black man turned slowly, his face calm, but there was a dangerous edge to the stillness in his eyes. Jason's stomach dropped. He had no idea what kind of storm he had just triggered. The slap echoed through the store, a sharp sound that seemed to freeze the air. For a brief moment, everything went still. The black man stood there, unmoving, his eyes locked onto Jason's with a calm intensity that sent a chill through Jason's body. The other customers in the store had stopped what they were doing, some of them staring in disbelief, while others shifted nervously, unsure of what would happen next. Jason's hand felt hot from the slap, but his heart raced with panic. What had he just done? His mind tried to process the situation, but all he could hear was the ringing in his ears, the awkward silence around him. He had never meant to escalate things this far. He had only wanted to make the sale, to make the man leave without causing more trouble, but now everything was different. The black man didn't speak. He didn't shout or make any threatening gestures. Instead, he simply stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at Jason with a calm, unblinking gaze. It was as if he was waiting for something, maybe for Jason to realize the mistake he had just made. Jason's mouth went dry. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean. But the black man interrupted him with a raised hand, signaling that he didn't want to hear any excuses. There was no anger in his expression, no fury in his eyes, just a deep, unsettling calm. It was the kind of calm that made Jason feel small, like he was the one who was in danger. The black man turned and walked toward the door without a word. Jason didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to stop the man, to apologize again, but another part of him wanted to let him go, to pretend nothing had happened. But just before the black man reached the door, he stopped. He turned around slowly, his face still unreadable. Jason froze, his eyes wide, unsure of what to expect next. "You'll regret this," the black man said, his voice low but clear, "but I'll give you a chance to make it right." Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. What did the man mean? What was he supposed to do to make it right? Before Jason could speak, the black man was gone, stepping out of the store and disappearing into the busy street outside. The door swung closed behind him with a soft thud, leaving Jason standing there, still trying to understand what had just happened. The other customers slowly returned to their shopping, but the tension in the air remained. Jason's mind raced, replaying the moment over and over. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed a line, one that he might not be able to come back from. What was it that the man had said? "You'll regret this." The words echoed in Jason's mind, and he couldn't help but feel like there was something far more important about the man than he had ever realized. Something that Jason had completely underestimated. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but Jason couldn't focus on anything. His thoughts kept going back to that moment. The calm, powerful gaze of the black man. He had no idea who he was, but he was starting to realize that he had just made a huge mistake. It was only a matter of time before the consequences caught up with him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jason sat at the counter in the electronics store, still trying to shake the unease from his encounter with the black man. He kept replaying the words the man had said. "You'll regret this." Those words had stuck with him like a haunting echo, and the thought of them made his stomach churn. But Jason tried to push it all out of his mind. He had work to do. He wiped down the counter, straightened some items on the shelves, and went about his evening routine. The store was quieter now, with only a few customers browsing, but Jason couldn't stop thinking about what had happened earlier that day. The man's calm demeanor, his eyes that seemed to see right through him. Everything about the situation had felt off. But there was one thing Jason didn't know. He didn't know who the black man really was. While Jason was busy trying to forget the strange encounter, the man he had slapped was busy with something entirely different. The black man, whose name was Marcus, wasn't just any ordinary customer. In fact, he wasn't just a regular man at all. Marcus was the leader of one of the most feared and powerful gangs in the city. His name was whispered in the shadows, and his reputation had spread like wildfire. People didn't dare cross him, and his gang controlled a significant portion of the city's underground activities. But Marcus wasn't the type to flaunt his power. He didn't walk around wearing expensive suits or driving flashy cars. He preferred to stay in the background, unnoticed. And that's exactly what he had done that day. When Marcus had walked into the electronics store, he wasn't trying to show off or make a scene. He had simply wanted to buy a new phone. He had walked into the store just like any other customer, but Jason's behavior had made it clear that the salesman had no idea who he was. Jason had assumed Marcus was just another person to look down on. He didn't know that the man standing in front of him controlled one of the most dangerous gangs in the city. Marcus had remained calm and composed, mostly because he knew that in situations like this, getting upset or angry would only cause more problems. He had learned over the years that patience was more powerful than any reaction. And when Jason had slapped him, Marcus had known that he had a choice to make. He could have reacted violently, but instead, he chose to give Jason a chance to realize the mistake he'd made. Jason had no idea that Marcus wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Marcus wasn't just a man you could slap and forget about. He was someone with power, someone whose words carried weight. Marcus didn't feel the need to explain who he was. He didn't care to announce his position in the gang world. All he cared about was making sure that people understood one simple lesson. Disrespect had consequences. As Marcus walked away from the store that afternoon, he didn't feel anger. He simply felt a sense of inevitability. Jason would learn soon enough who he had crossed. It was just a matter of time. Meanwhile, Jason, still clueless about the true identity of the man he had slapped, went about his evening, thinking the worst was over. Little did he know, the story was far from finished. The next few days would unfold in ways he could never have imagined. The following day, the events at the electronics store seemed to fade from Jason's mind. Life had returned to normal, or at least it appeared that way. Jason went about his usual routine, talking to customers, organizing the store, and keeping up with his sales. The day seemed ordinary, except for the nagging feeling that something had changed. What Jason didn't know was that the black man he had slapped the previous day, Marcus, wasn't just some random customer. Marcus wasn't just a regular man walking into a store. He was the leader of a powerful gang, one that controlled a significant part of the city. People in the city didn't speak of him lightly, and those who did so with fear and respect. Marcus wasn't flashy. He didn't wear expensive suits or show off in front of people. Instead, he blended into the background, carrying himself with a quiet, commanding presence. His reputation was built not on what he wore or the cars he drove, but on his control over the city's most dangerous corners, where few dared to go. His gang, known for its precision and power, wasn't the type to attract attention. They didn't create chaos for the sake of it. They operated silently, making sure to keep their business in the shadows. Their dealings were discreet, and their reach was wide. But Marcus, despite being the leader, wasn't the type to flaunt his power. He was calculating, always 2 steps ahead of anyone who could potentially challenge him. And as the leader of the gang, Marcus was the kind of person who made people think twice before crossing him. Whether it was a rival gang or a single person, Marcus had a reputation for being someone who never forgave disrespect. And as much as he preferred to avoid drama, he also knew that when it came to matters of pride and reputation, there were lines that couldn't be crossed. As he walked away from the electronics store the previous day, Marcus had made a decision. He wouldn't immediately retaliate, but he would make sure Jason understood the consequences of his actions. He believed in teaching lessons, not just for the person who made the mistake, but for others who might be watching. The gang that Marcus led wasn't just about violence or intimidation. It was about control, influence, and respect. And while Marcus rarely used his power for personal gain, he never allowed others to undermine his authority or disrespect him. The slap in the store was an insult, and it would not go unaddressed. Marcus knew the importance of timing. He understood that if he acted too quickly, it might send the wrong message. But if he waited too long, the power he commanded might begin to slip. He needed to be strategic, just like he had been in every other part of his life. His reputation as a leader depended on how he handled situations like this. Back in the store, Jason continued his work, unaware of the storm that was quietly forming around him. He thought the matter was over. After all, the black man had left without causing a scene. But the truth was, Jason's life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. Marcus, the quiet man with the unshakable gaze, wasn't finished with him yet. The following morning, Jason showed up for work like any other day. The store was busy, and he quickly got into the flow of his routine, helping customers, organizing the displays, and keeping track of sales. But his mind wasn't entirely focused. The memory of the previous day kept creeping back. Jason tried to shake it off. After all, the black man had left without causing any real trouble. But he couldn't stop thinking about the man's calm demeanor, the way he had looked at him after the slap. The man's eyes had seemed so composed, yet there had been something in them that made Jason feel uneasy, as though he had done something far worse than just insult a stranger. Just then, Jason's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was a message from a friend of his, Mark. Mark was someone who often kept an eye on things around town, especially when it came to the city's underworld. He wasn't part of any gang, but he knew a lot of people who were. Jason opened the message and read it quickly. "You slapped Marcus, didn't you? You have no idea who that guy is, do you?" Jason froze, his heart skipping a beat. He hadn't heard the name Marcus before, but there was something about the message that made him nervous. What did Mark mean by that? Jason quickly typed a reply. "What do you mean? I just slapped some guy yesterday. He was rude, and I lost my temper." Mark replied almost instantly. "You need to be careful, man. Marcus is the leader of one of the biggest and most dangerous gangs in the city. You're not dealing with just any guy. People fear him, and he controls a lot of things. Trust me, you don't want to get on his bad side." Jason felt a cold shiver run down his spine as he read the message. The slap wasn't just some random mistake. It was a huge misstep. He had no idea who he had actually slapped, but now it was becoming clear that he had made a serious error in judgment. His stomach tightened as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He quickly texted back, "What do I do? What if he comes after me?" Mark's reply was short and blunt. "Lay low, don't make any waves. And whatever you do, don't try to find him. Let it be. Trust me, you don't want to bring more attention to yourself." Jason's hands trembled as he put the phone down. His mind was racing. He tried to picture Marcus, the man he had slapped, walking out of the store so calmly, so composed. But now that he knew who Marcus really was, that calmness felt more like a warning. Marcus had been letting Jason off easy. Jason hadn't realized it, but the man had chosen not to retaliate right away. And now, the threat of consequences was looming over him. Jason glanced around the store nervously. He kept thinking about Mark's words. You don't want to get on his bad side. His mind went into overdrive, imagining all sorts of things that could happen. What if Marcus sent someone to teach him a lesson? What if the gang came after him? Jason's anxiety grew with each passing minute. He had never felt so small. It wasn't just about a slap anymore. He had unknowingly crossed a line, and now he had no idea how to fix it. As he tried to focus on the customers around him, he realized there was only one thing he could do now: wait and hope that Marcus would show him mercy. The days passed slowly for Jason, each one dragging by with a heavy weight on his shoulders. Every time the doorbell of the store chimed as a customer entered, Jason's heart skipped a beat. His mind kept replaying the events with Marcus, and the growing anxiety was beginning to eat away at him. He couldn't stop thinking about the black man, the man he had slapped without realizing who he was. Every time he heard a car slow down outside, Jason wondered if it was someone from Marcus's gang coming to settle the score. He would glance nervously at the door, half expecting it to burst open, and for someone to walk in with bad news. But each time, it was just another customer, looking for the latest phone or gadget. But Jason could feel the pressure building. Something was coming. The tension in the air felt thick, like the calm before a storm. It was around the third day after the incident when things started to take a turn. Jason was helping a customer pick out a new laptop when the store door opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a hoodie that covered his face. His steps were deliberate and slow, his presence commanding. Jason didn't recognize him immediately, but something about the way the man moved made him uneasy. His instincts kicked in, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary customer. The man walked straight to the counter, where Jason was assisting the customer, and placed a small envelope on the counter. Jason looked up, trying to maintain his composure, but his nerves were getting the best of him. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't respond immediately. He simply turned and glanced around the store, as if looking for something or someone. Jason felt his stomach tighten. Who was this person? Was this the beginning of the consequences he had been fearing? The man's eyes briefly met Jason's, and in that moment, Jason felt a chill. He had seen that same look before, the same cold, calculated gaze that Marcus had given him when he left the store. The man's expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made Jason realize he was standing in front of someone who wasn't just any random person. Finally, the man spoke. "Marcus sends his regards," he said, his voice low and steady. "He wants you to know that your actions didn't go unnoticed." Jason's breath caught in his throat. He knew immediately that the man was talking about the slap. He had no idea who this person was or how they were connected to Marcus, but the message was clear. The man gave a slight nod, as if confirming that the message had been delivered, and then turned to leave. Before he exited the store, he paused at the door and glanced over his shoulder one last time. "Don't make the mistake of thinking this is over," he said, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. As the door closed behind him, Jason felt the room close in on him. The message was clear. He was being watched. And Marcus was not someone who forgot easily. The fear that Jason had been trying to ignore for days finally hit him with full force. He knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever Marcus had planned next, it was coming. And Jason could do nothing but wait and hope that it wouldn't be too late for him to make things right. But deep down, he feared that the consequences were already set in motion, and there was no escaping them now. The next few days were filled with a sense of dread. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. The message from the mysterious man had weighed heavily on him. "Don't make the mistake of thinking this is over." Those words kept echoing in his mind. He had no idea when or how Marcus would come for him, but he knew the moment was coming, and he wasn't sure he could handle it. His work at the store felt like a blur. He went through the motions, helping customers, restocking shelves, and making sales, but his thoughts were constantly on the edge. Every time someone entered the store, Jason's heart would race, wondering if they were sent by Marcus. But days passed, and nothing happened. The calm, though unsettling, seemed endless. Then, on the 7th day after the warning, it finally came. Jason was adjusting some items on the counter when the doorbell rang. This time, he wasn't prepared for what happened next. A group of men walked into the store. They didn't look like regular customers. There were 4 of them, all dressed casually but with a certain confidence in their movements. They seemed out of place in the store's clean, modern environment, like they were used to more dangerous places. Jason's heart skipped a beat as they approached the counter, and he felt the blood drain from his face. One of the men, the tallest of the group, stepped forward. His eyes scanned the store before landing on Jason. There was no smile, no politeness in his demeanor, just a direct and chilling stare. Jason knew immediately that these men weren't here to shop. The tall man placed a thick envelope on the counter, much like the one from a few days ago. "Marcus sent this," he said in a low voice. Jason swallowed, his throat dry. "He wants you to understand something." Jason's knees almost gave way, but he managed to stay standing. He knew this was the moment he had been dreading. The man's voice was calm, but the weight of his words was heavy. Jason's mind raced. Was this it? Were they finally coming to collect the price of his mistake? Before Jason could say anything, the man continued. "You crossed a line the other day, but Marcus isn't interested in hurting you. He doesn't need to. He believes in lessons, not punishment. If you've learned what he wanted you to learn, then you can go back to your life." Jason's breath caught in his chest. He had prepared himself for a violent encounter, for anything that could come from a gang leader like Marcus, but this was different. He had expected anger, threats, or worse, but Marcus wasn't like that. The calmness of the man's words made Jason realize something. Marcus wasn't trying to destroy him. He wanted to show him that actions have consequences, but they didn't have to lead to violence. The tall man's eyes softened a little as he added, "Marcus doesn't forget, but he also doesn't waste his time. He just wants respect, and you gave him that today." Jason felt a sense of relief he didn't even know he had been holding on to. The men turned and left without another word, leaving the envelope on the counter. Jason stared at it for a moment, his thoughts racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had expected a confrontation, but instead, Marcus had chosen to give him a second chance, to teach him a lesson without resorting to violence. As the door closed behind them, Jason sat down heavily on the stool behind the counter. He realized that Marcus had done more than just send a message. He had given him an opportunity, a chance to change, to show that he understood the importance of respect, not just in the world of gangs, but in every aspect of life. Jason opened the envelope slowly, finding a small card inside. On it was a simple message. "Respect is earned. Don't forget that." It wasn't just a warning, it was a lesson. Jason understood now, and he would carry it with him for the rest of his life. The events of the past week had shaken Jason more than he cared to admit. He had spent the last few days with a heavy heart, feeling the weight of the lesson he had learned. The gang members who had come into the store, the quiet warning, and the envelope. It was all a lot to process. But now that it was over, he felt strangely relieved. The tension that had been eating away at him seemed to slowly dissolve. Jason sat in the break room of the store, staring at the card from Marcus. Respect is earned, the message had said, and Jason now fully understood what it meant. It wasn't just about his actions toward Marcus. It was about how he treated others in every part of his life. Jason realized how easily he had judged people, how quickly he had assumed things based on appearances. Marcus had shown him that assumptions could be dangerous. Jason had learned the hard way, but at least he had learned. He knew now that he couldn't afford to act out of pride or judgment, and that lesson had changed him. He had always believed that people like Marcus were to be feared, that they were dangerous because of their power. But Marcus had proven that strength didn't always come from force. It came from respect, control, and understanding. As Jason sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, he heard the doorbell of the store ring again. He looked up, and to his surprise, it was the same group of men from earlier. The tall man stepped forward once again, but this time, his expression was less serious. "Marcus wanted to see you," the man said, his tone neutral but not threatening. "He thinks you've learned what you need to." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what this meant. Had he passed the test? Had he truly earned Marcus's respect? He stood up, trying to remain calm, but inside, his mind was racing. What now? Was he supposed to go with them? Without a word, the man gestured for Jason to follow him. The group led him out of the store, through the bustling city streets, and into a quieter, less populated part of town. Jason's nerves were on edge, but he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of curiosity. He wasn't sure where they were taking him, but something told him this was part of Marcus's plan. He just had to trust it. They finally arrived at a small, nondescript building. The tall man knocked on the door, and a moment later, it swung open to reveal Marcus himself, standing in the doorway with that same calm demeanor. Jason felt a knot in his stomach, but Marcus only smiled. "Come in," he said simply. Jason entered the building, and as he did, he was surprised to see that it wasn't anything like he had expected. It was a modest, almost peaceful place, with comfortable furniture and a warm, inviting atmosphere. There was no sign of the danger or power Jason had feared. Instead, there was a sense of control, a sense that Marcus was in charge, not through fear, but through his ability to create balance. "Have a seat," Marcus offered. Jason sat down, still unsure of what to expect. Marcus sat across from him and regarded him for a moment, as if measuring his thoughts. "You've earned your place here," Marcus finally said. "Not through violence, not through fear, but through understanding." Jason felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been given a second chance, and he had proven himself worthy of it. Marcus had shown him the true power of respect, and now he had earned the right to be part of something bigger than himself. "You're free to go back to your life now," Marcus said, standing up. "But know this, you'll always have a place here if you remember what you've learned." Jason nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude he never expected. As he left the building and walked back toward the store, he knew one thing for sure: his life had changed forever. He wasn't the same person who had slapped Marcus in that electronics store. He was better, wiser, and most importantly, he now understood the true meaning of respect.